All right, in this lesson, we'll explore object methods. So as I mentioned previously, everything in Ruby is an object. A string is an object. An integer is an object. A floating point number is an object. These are all different objects in Ruby. An object is just a thing. It's a data structure. It's some kind of representation within Ruby. Now, objects have methods, which are basically functionalities. A method is a message that you send to the object that instructs it to do something, that gives it some kind of command. Now, objects will have both exclusive and shared methods depending on their object type. There are things that a number can do that a string cannot, and vice versa. And similarly, there are things that an integer can do that a floating point number can do as well. The methods or commands or functionalities that are available on an object will depend on what that object is. Some of those functionalities are going to be similar or shared. Some of them are going to be completely different. So let's take a look at how we can call methods, which basically means send messages to these objects in Ruby. So I'm going to begin with p, which of course is a method simply to output something to our Atom Runner console. And I'm going to create a string. Let's call it hello world. In order to call a method on an object, in this case this string right here is an object, I use the dot syntax, or the period. I place it at the very end, dot, and then I simply write the method name that I want to call or invoke. To call or invoke a method simply means to run it, to tell the object that that's the operation that you want it to perform. So what I'm about to write is not something that I came up with. These are just methods that are available on a string object. These are things that you can look up in the Ruby documentation. So for example, on a string object, we have a method called length. What length does is return us the number of characters that are within that string. So when I execute this, we're going to get 11. Now you may be looking at hello and saying hello is 5 letters and world is 5 letters. Why are we getting 11? Well, of course, everything in a string, every single character is counted as 1. So the space in the middle is 1 character. So it's 5 plus 1 plus 5, which is why we get 11. Now what Ruby is giving back to us here as 11 is actually a brand new number object, a brand new integer object. So we've taken this string, and when we call the length method on it, what we're getting back from Ruby is another object, and an object of a different type. We're not getting back a string, we're getting back an integer, a number that's equal to 11. Let's take a look at another method. I'm going to write the exact same thing, p hello world. And this time I'm going to use the dot, again, that's called dot syntax, or the dot operator, and I'm going to try a new method called upcase. What upcase does is give us the string with all of its characters capitalized. Now this is a little bit different from the method that we saw up above, because what length did is give us back a new integer object, or a new number object. In this case, the upcase method gave us a new string object. This right here is a string. It's just a string with all of the characters from the original string capitalized. So the methods themselves can get us different values to return. They can return to us different objects themselves. Here we see a number being returned and a string being returned. And what upcase does, of course, is capitalize the letters, and we have a complementary downcase method. If I write p hello world in all caps, and I write dot downcase, what that's going to do predictably is return a new string with all of the characters in lowercase. So here we can see hello world appears here on the right, and these letters are all in lowercase. Now so far we've been using all of these methods on strings, and secondly we've been using them all on these kind of arbitrary strings that I've created. But we can also call them on variables, because remember, variables are just pointers to various objects. So for example, I'm going to keep this code up here, and then I'm just going to replicate it below. If I have a string, let's just give it a name of foo, which is a very common variable name, just a common programmatic term that people use to give a variable a name. So I've created a variable called foo, and I'm going to assign it to hello world. What I can do below is do pfoo.length, and again, remember that foo is just a reference to the string hello world. So what Ruby is going to do is substitute foo with this string object, and then call the length method on it. And what we're going to get is the exact same result, 11. And similarly, if I do pfoo.upcase, it's going to take foo, which is a variable that's pointing to this string object. It's going to take that string object and call the upcase method on it, which capitalizes all of the characters, and we're going to get the same result. So hopefully this is starting to give you a sense of how variables are helpful. Instead of having to write out hello world each time, we can simply store it in a variable called foo and reference foo as the variable that we're calling these methods on. Now, so far, we've only explored methods on string objects, but methods are available on all kinds of objects. So let's take a look at one method that's available on a number. Let's say I have a number like 10, so I'm just going to output 10. Let me, in fact, put a puts in here to create some extra spacing. There we see 10 appear right here. There is a method that's available on an integer called next. And what next does is increment that number by 1, or basically add 1. So if I do p10.next, what it's going to do is give me 11. So it's taking 10 and adding 1. It may not seem like a particularly helpful method, but this is really just to introduce you to what a method does. A method is just a message to the object that says, hey, do this. The next method tells a number to increase itself by 1 and give us the result. The length method on a string tells Ruby to count the number of characters in that string. The upcase method gives us a string with all of the characters capitalized. So each of these are just different messages or different commands that we can give to our various objects, in this case, strings and numbers. Similarly, if I do something like p-1.next, that's simply going to take -1 and increment it by 1, so we're going to get 0. -1 plus 1 is 0, and we're going to get a brand new integer object back here. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. I'm going to do puts. Let's say I'm going to puts hello world, and we can see hello world output here. And let's say I do puts hello world, and now I'm going to call a method called inspect. Let's take a look at what this looks like and compare the hello world above and the hello world below and see if it reminds you of anything. Hopefully it reminds you of the p method in Ruby, and in fact all that p is, if I write p hello world, we can see the exact same result on the last two lines here. All that p is underneath Ruby's hood is basically a shorthand syntax for puts with the inspect method called on an object. So what inspect does, of course, is give us a more literal view of something. So what inspect does on a string is offer it to us with the double quotes and things that we discussed earlier, such as the symbols for line breaks and things like that. But all that p is underneath the hood is basically calling puts, but also using the inspect method on whatever it is that we give to p. So whenever we do p hello world, it's taking hello world and automatically calling inspect on it and then giving us the result. So really, methods are just operations that we can call on different objects, and certainly in this case, Ruby has just a shortcut way of doing that. But in this lesson, we explored just a quick introduction to object methods. We're certainly going to review all of these, so there's no need to memorize them immediately, as long as you get the big picture idea that these are simply messages or commands that we're giving to objects. That's the most important thing. We explored quite a bit of methods here: length, upcase, downcase, and next. We explored them on different objects as well, inspect as well. 5 different total methods, kind of incredible. But really, an object method is just a message that we send to an object, and we'll definitely keep reiterating this concept as we proceed throughout the course.